Podcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show. Podcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show.
Hey everybody, Patrick Veroneau here. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Learning from Leaders. Today we're going to talk finances with Sandi Bragar and Cammie Doder. Sandi is the Chief Client Officer. She's also a certified financial planner. And Cammie is the Chief Marketing Officer for their wealth management company called Aspiriant. They also host a great podcast called Money Tales, and that's where I was first introduced to them, where they provide really just such valuable information for people that are trying to really figure out how to manage their wealth. On this episode, though, we really tie that in with leadership, and the two are so intertwined, I think, because if you're not in a good place financially, if you're worried about finances, I think it distracts from you being able to effectively lead other people. So we talk about that as well as on this episode, really looking in terms of people that might be retiring, what things are important for them to take into account, people changing jobs, what's important for them, and also if you've got an entrepreneurial itch, what things do you need to be thinking about as you start your journey as an entrepreneur? I'd encourage you to take a look at their website, which will be in the show notes. I think it'll quickly come out as we have this conversation at how much they really care about what they're doing and the mission of really helping other people to, as I said in the beginning, manage their wealth, but I would say also make sure or help people to understand how to create wealth. So let's get into it. Cammie and Sandi, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Learning from Leaders. I had so much fun when I was on your podcast. I was like, how can I not want to return the favor and do this all over again? As I mentioned ahead of time, I'm going down to Florida this weekend. I still have not played pickleball yet. So I want that.
There's time, Patrick. There's time.
I'm just getting going, baby. I'm just getting going.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us. We're excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, thanks. I'm looking forward to it as well. I think, as we talked about before, I think the idea of leadership and finances, these two things go together. And my perspective on it, and I think you share this, is that if I'm not in a good place financially myself, the stress that can provide is going to bleed, I think, into how I interact with those around me. And I think that's such an important perspective for us to talk about. But I think something else that I'd love your perspectives on is how COVID really has changed so many things, right? In terms of I think how people reflect on what do they want themselves. And the Great Resignation is one thing that's come to mind more recently. And I hear from the standpoint of people leaving organizations to start their own businesses, or they've finally gotten to the point where it was earlier than they wanted to, but they said, I'm going to retire now. They feel like they've got enough. I think about it from the opposite of, I know how difficult it is to run a business. So financially, how do people make sure that they're set up to be able to survive the uptake of that? But also, if I'm one of those people that's retiring, how to make sure that I really am stable enough that I can do this? So that's a loaded question, but I thought we could sort of pick away at those things.
Yeah, that's a great question for these times. Why don't I start, and Cammie, if you'd like to add in afterwards, we'll move forward that way. The pandemic has been a great trigger of transitions for many people, changing jobs, starting something new, retiring, you mentioned. We've also seen divorce happening, which is another big transition. And regardless of what the transition is, the best way to prepare for it is to give some thought in advance before taking action and really envision what you want the future to be. Have really crisp vision goals that are aligned with your values. I just think that's so important, Patrick, for everyone, because it will help you through the challenging times. And with transition, there's a big passage period, right? So you get ready to make a decision, you make the decision, but then there's a lot that's happening in your life to actually go through that transition, a big passage phase. That's usually where there's a lot of redefining of identity. And then ultimately you get to the new normal. And so to prepare, not only do you want the clear, crisp vision that's aligned with your values and encapsulates your goals, but you really want to understand where you're heading into the transition financially, right? What does your balance sheet look like? How are you going to pay your bills during the transition time? And changing careers or doing something different career-wise is a lot different than retiring. So we can talk about those two separately. But the beginning phase is the same in terms of taking stock. What do you have? How are you going to cover your expenses? If you're making an investment in a new career venture, how are you going to fund that investment? And what pathway do you have? How long of a runway do you have to prepare and keep you financially afoot while you're building something new? I think those are the key parts to getting started.
And Patrick, you talked about the stress that comes with if you're not in a good financial place. And what we hear, clients who are hiring us, it's not necessarily lacking money. Sometimes there's a lot of wealth, but the stress comes with not understanding the wealth, not understanding what it is, what it's for. And so that planning can be really, really powerful. And I'll add one more thing that I've heard, it's not really the Great Resignation, it's the Great Redirection, which makes a lot of sense. That's that change that Sandi was just talking about. Yeah. And that change can be really uncomfortable. Without, one of our recent podcast guests talked about having a plan A, but also have a plan B and C, really be thinking through what are options, how do you prepare for it? And it'll give you that, it'll help with that stressful feeling.
Yeah. And it's so funny you say that, right? The plan B, the plan C. And it all depends on who you talk to, because you'll hear some people say, oh, don't have a plan B, because when you have a plan B, right, then you're going to lean on that and not stick with plan A. I am not in that camp. I'm a plan B person. I like to have a little backup, something. But I do think that is so important. And to your point about the sort of the Great Resignation, or, however, Great Reshuffling, look at this. I am one of those that when I hear the word the Great Resignation, I will often say that we have missed the biggest part of what's going on. We've named this the Great Resignation. We've missed the real count on people that have left organizations, because to me, this has been going on for more than a decade. And what I mean by that is that people have left their organizations in record numbers, or mentally and emotionally. It's only now that they're finally at a point where they're physically leaving the organizations. They've been thinking about this or wishing they could do it. All you have to do is look at the Gallup surveys that have been done over the past decade that shows that a third of employees are engaged within organizations. Those are all people that were wishing they could get out and go somewhere else, but they weren't the options at that point. And I think that's the difference now, right? Now I'm going to start my own business, or I'm going to retire, or I'm going to go work
from a different location. All of a sudden, exactly. This is now we realize.
I find it all to be quite thrilling. There's nothing better for me than working with a client at Aspiriant. We work with corporate executives, family business owners, and entrepreneurs. There's nothing more exciting for me to see a client really achieve that vision that they've set for themselves. And a lot of the vision has to do with lifestyle, right? It's doing work that they're really not only passionate about, but really achieves a purpose that drives their life. Or when they're retiring, having that vision of what they're going to do, what's going to bring purpose to their life when they're not going to an office or wherever they were going day to day. So I think it's thrilling. I believe that people should be spending their time and their productivity doing the things that adds the most meaning to them. And I think the pandemic has just crystallized the fact that life is fragile and it's not limitless. And it really is important that we do what's driving us.
Yeah, without question. Without question. I did a podcast, probably it's almost 2 years ago now, that it was in this looking at all the things that are going on, right? We had experienced an impeachment, social unrest, a health crisis with COVID, a financial crisis with, as a result of COVID, all of those things in a period of a year that many of us hadn't experienced over a period of our lifetimes, all of those things. And I think they really did. And I was saying this back then, is this provides us an opportunity to look at our financial health. What do we really want? Our careers. What do we really want in this environment? Our personal health. What do we want for ourselves in terms of taking responsibility to make sure that we're strong enough to be able to fend off some of the outside diseases that we're impacting? I think the last 2 years, I would agree, has really provided an opportunity for people to have a lot of time to think about, what do I really want? And you guys play such an important role in that, right? Because let's face it, financially, you got to pay the bills. You have to pay the bills. You want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. If you have a family, you want to make sure they're protected. Yeah. If helping support your community is important, you want to make sure that you're dedicating resources, whether it's financial, time, or your human capital, toward helping your community. All these things you mentioned, Patrick, are so interrelated. And I think what's really important, and this is why Cammie and I started the Money Tales podcast, is in all of this time of transition, it's really important to talk about money, not only to think about it and plan with it, but to be talking about it with your partner, with your family members, whether they're your parents or your kids, with your friends. We need to be in this conversation because a lot of people, I think, have been afraid to take action because they're afraid of the money implications. Oh my gosh, my paycheck is going to go away. Oh my God, what's it going to be like? How am I going to survive? How am I going to pay this bill? What am I going to do about this debt? And so if we're in conversation, it helps normalize a lot of the emotions around money, and we can learn more about ourselves and find ways forward.
Thanks, Sandi, for bringing that up, because another thing we hear a lot is by talking about it makes this elephant in the room, this thing that feels so big, become smaller. And people realize, oh, this has happened to many other people, or this thought, or, a financial decision or concern. Others have felt it before. And it's not just me and this burden. And we hear through these conversations that everyone feels this stuff. Everyone thinks these things. And so we think about that. The other thing, when you liken it to physical health and mental health, that being financial health, as you're having these conversations, as you're working on it, you don't tackle it all at once. These are bite-sized. You look for partners and coaches and mentors. That's what I love about learning from leaders. You're really talking about, how do you help people? We don't have to do all this all by ourselves. We can't. That's right, Pat. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I always chuckle when I hear somebody say, oh, this person's self-made. There's nobody that's self-made.
That's
it's impossible, right? If you think about it, unless you birthed yourself, made your own clothes, you schooled yourself, you made the roads that you drive on, the car that you drive in. None of us are self-made. Self-motivated, yes. I think we can be that, but that still requires, we need other people to be able to help us, and we need to help other people too.
It makes life so much more rewarding, right? To
Without
be collaborative, question. To be able to rely on one another, to rely on someone else's expertise or someone that they know, or whatever the case is. Achieving your goals when you have a team of people or a group of friends or just a huddle around you makes life much more rewarding.
Without question. I would be curious, from your perspectives in terms of leaders that you're working with, are there any things that you've sort of seen over the last couple of years that have weighed on individuals more as it relates to finances?
I think what I've seen with clients is a deviation of attention from the investment portfolio and more of a focus on how are we using the money in our life. So it's been less about the maintaining the wealth that's been created and more about how best to use it. And so I think it has been very interesting. And we work with individuals, we work with couples, we work with families. In the case of the families, there's been a lot of conversation about getting the next generation, the rising generations of the family involved in the conversations and helping make sure that they have the right competencies, that they're engaged in conversations about family wealth and really have a sense of what is expected of them, what they should expect, and really helping them stay motivated and building their own lives, but with the support of family, not necessarily financial support, but with the support of the human capital, the spiritual capital, intellectual capital.
Interesting. Have you seen more in terms of spending, or what I would say more on the leisure side where people are spending money, right? I'm taking trips more, more experiential type spending, I guess.
I think there's been a lot of pent up.
I was just thinking that, Sandy.
Desire for that sort of spending. Certainly there are many clients who have continued to travel, but I think where we are still seeing a lot of energy and financial focus dedicated toward is a second home or a family home, right? A meaningful place where the family can aggregate together and spend time together. And you just raised your hand, Patrick, because you're heading down to Florida to yours soon.
I don't mean to gloat or anything. But
No, but it's important, right? If where we spend our time, how we spend our time, all of that is super important to all these aspects of our overall health that you've been talking about. So we've been working with clients to help figure out like the best financing plan. How's the home going to be maintained? In some cases, there are more than 2 homes, and that's always fun and interesting. I've learned a lot about different strategies for that. And I'll just share one because it might be interesting to you because I think you're about to furnish your place. I have a client who has a couch that they adore. It's so comfortable. It's big. They have a large family. Everybody's comfortable. So they've bought that same couch and have it in their various homes because that helps make it feel more homey.
I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a brilliant idea. And, just keeping certain aspects of your wardrobe in different locations, right? So you're not always having to pack and make it a big deal.
As we've talked to guests over the last 2 years, and there has been this pent-up demand, the energy has gone into whatever they are pursuing, maybe from a career standpoint or, growth standpoint, that might not have been travel or buying a second home, but was, where do I want to spend my energies? I mean, I think they all weave in together.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good point because there also has been an even greater focus on philanthropy as well. And we've seen clients, Patrick, who are wanting to be much more strategic in how they're giving. And when I say strategic, they have goals in mind. There's an impact that they're wanting to have, and they're figuring out how best to align their financial capital that's earmarked for charitable giving, as well as their skill sets and their networks, and really trying to pour into organizations and make a difference and make the world better for all of us, which is really exciting to be part of from an advisory perspective.
I read a really neat article, or not so much neat, it was fascinating to me. It was in the Wall Street Journal. I want to say it was probably last Friday. It was talking about couples that were actually buying larger houses. Now, these were couples that were in retirement age, and they were going from a 2,700 square foot, and now they're buying a 6,000 square foot home. And this trend that the Wall Street Journal was trying to talk about. And to me, I thought it may fall in line with, and I didn't read the whole article, about wanting to expand to be able to have places where if they've got kids or extended families that can come back to, that they're not empty nesters as much anymore as they've enlarged the nest to make it more comfortable for people to come back.
That's right. And I think especially in the pandemic, where there's been such a moratorium on being able to be with large groups of people, to create a space where you can have the people that you want around you to be with you and feel comfortable and not have everybody stepping on their toes. That's a great solution for people who can afford to do that.
Yeah, I thought that was what I was thinking as I was sort of scanning that article. Taking a step back, if we're talking about, say I'm one of these soon to be Great Resignation individuals, and I'm thinking I've got a really great idea for a business. This is something I've always loved to do, and I'm going to go off on my own. If they were to come to you too and say, here's what I want to do, is there any sort of checklist that you'd say, make sure that you get a good handle on these things first before you do it?
Yeah, I think for someone who's leaving a job, it's really important to think about what are you dependent upon your job for currently? That's where many people get their health insurance. People have their retirement plans, other benefits. So you want to be thoughtful of making sure you have a plan for continuing whatever benefits you will need in the foreseeable future. So a lot of people will go on to COBRA, for example, to extend their health insurance, retirement plan contributions, to the extent you haven't maxed out your contribution and you have capacity to do that, making the contribution and maximizing it as much as you can before you leave is a good idea because you might not have some income for a while if you're starting something new. I think looking at insurance, not mentioned health insurance, but a lot of people purchase life insurance through their companies. And sometimes if they need that coverage, they can continue it. But maybe a better idea is to get life insurance coverage somewhere else if it's needed, because you can control the costs in the time period in which you have it. So I think kind of getting really organized on what do you have currently that you're relying on your employer for? What do you need? Figuring out a plan to continue what you need in some way, whether it's with the employer, coming up with something new. That's really important. And then also doing some cash flow planning, right? If you're starting something new, it takes new businesses oftentimes a while to get up and running. You can talk a lot about that, Patrick. You've been there before. Yeah. So it's really important to make sure that folks know how they're going to cover their bills in the meantime. And sometimes, making sure that you have enough cash on hand or determining in advance what expenses you're going to cut back on and just being very aware of what your current lifestyle is and what levers you have to control that during the transition period to the new business, I think is super important. And then also understanding what is required from a financial perspective to launch this new business. Are there capital investments that need to be made? Oftentimes, there's at least buying computer equipment, maybe some office equipment, and understanding what the new expenses will be. And again, how you can cover those expenses in the meantime, I think are the key pieces from a financial perspective.
And then there's one other that we've heard from clients and others that there's value before people step away from something. Maybe they're even downsizing their work, they're retiring or want to do, something in a much smaller scale, is understanding the value perceived that you got from having this, company, these people to work with. There's value. I'm about to say, go to the office and have this community. We're not going to the office these days, but we are still in this really valuable community when you're at the job. And understanding when you give this up, we spoke with someone on Money Tales who just didn't realize how they'd be maybe a little bit of an island or feeling a little untethered as a result of not having this place that he really got such value from working for.
That is such a great point too, because I do think that's one of those things. It's like, if you're not used to being by yourself, right, and it can be very lonely at times, right? When you're doing this, if you're not in an office anymore, you're all wrapped up in trying to make this thing stay afloat. It's like the Maytag repairman. I don't know if you remember those, right? This loneliness of sort of like you're on your own. I had the good fortune that I had an office out of my house for all the years that I was working for an organization. So I had that ability, but even that, I was still going out and meeting with a lot of individuals on a regular basis. And that's where I got my socialization. It wasn't until I went on my own that it was less time. I was more time by myself. So you better like yourself.
Well, I think, and that just brings up a really good point of what I was talking about earlier about vision, right? Really thinking through what's it going to be like on a day in, day out basis when you make the change? Because I think you never really know until you do it. But if you think through all the different aspects of your life and your current routines and how they might be changing as a result of a transition, then it gives you an opportunity to try it on and prepare yourself for certain things that will shift. And you can decide whether that's okay or whether you want to do something like have just a networking lunch on the calendar every day for the next month so that you have someone else that you're interacting with during the day if you're going to be on your own for a while.
And I do think it's so much easier today to have a side hustle. There's so many more opportunities to branch out and give it a test run without having to jump in completely. You can sort of nibble away at it, see how it works.
Really good point. The side hustles to test. The younger generations talk about the fact that if you don't have a few things going at once, you're crazy.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of value to that.
Yeah. And from a financial perspective, I'll just add, once things start really kicking into gear and the revenue starts coming in, then there's a lot of really great planning opportunities, especially on the side of setting up self-employed retirement plans that I think a lot of entrepreneurs miss. So I'll just mention that so your listeners can put a pin in that idea.
Yeah. Now, what about the other end of this, of people that are in organizations and, they're just tired of what they're doing. And they say, you know what, I think we've got enough to be able to pull this off right now and retire early. I'm imagining you're seeing a fair amount of those that are saying, we want to travel now. We want to do whatever, but
that's right.
I don't want to go to the office.
That's right. And so I think retirement is another one of those words that probably does need to change, because I think most people think about retirement being as like, you stop working, you just spend some time traveling for a little bit and life is over. Yeah. And that's not what we see from our clients. So when we talk about it with our clients, Patrick, we will focus on financial independence. And financial independence is a point when clients have created and amassed enough resources, financial resources, to take care of funding all of their goals for the rest of their lives. And we do a lot of very detailed long-term modeling to help clients make sure that they're at that point where they are financially independent. And we can look at it under different stress testing variables. What happens if returns are lower than we expect? What happens if inflation is higher? And really just help people through a modeling exercise get really comfortable that they have achieved financial independence. And when they stop working, that is a really big change. So some of the things that Cammie was mentioning about people who stop working and start their own thing is true for people who stop working and achieve financial independence. From our experience, it really helps to have a plan in place for how you're going to spend your time, who you're going to spend it with, what are you going to be doing? Do those activities require more money than the lifestyle that you spend? Because I think that's another thing. Like clients think, oh, well, we'll retire. We're not going to spend nearly as much. And that is so not true in our experience, because people have more time. They want to travel. They want to do things that they haven't had the chance to do. So we usually see a spike in spending for the first several years. And then ultimately it does start to trend downward again. But I think having that purpose, what is my identity as someone who's no longer working? What is going to feed my soul? How am I going to spend my time? And what impact do I want to have on the world? If people can answer that question, in my experience, they have a much better, quote unquote, retirement period, which can be decades, right? Because some people just don't want to work and they stop working when they're quite young. And so I think being able to really project out what is the time period in this stage of financial independence, and is work going to fall off completely? What we see with our clients is oftentimes they will join corporate boards or they'll do advisory work. So there is still income coming in and they're just working on their own schedule. And clients who do that really enjoy those opportunities to stay engaged and using the careers that they developed during their careers during this time in a different way.
Yeah, I would agree with that in terms of what does retirement look like? I know for us, now our youngest is a sophomore in high school, so we've still got some time to go here, but I don't think of ever retiring like I'm just going to cut loose with everything and I don't have to do anything anymore. I think I'd go crazy doing that. It's just, I would imagine it's people having the flexibility to decide what they want to do as opposed to what they need to do.
That's right. And I think the point that I'm hoping that I'm making clear is that it's important to ask yourself those questions, I think, before you stop working or before you reduce your work life a lot, because else you find yourself with all this time.
Traumatized by
this is where we see, especially like with married couples, this is where it's like, oh my gosh, will you just go back to work? You're driving me nuts. So it can take some time to figure out. So best to go into that period with some ideas.
Yeah, I would think whether it's retirement or entrepreneurship, that coming to speak to experts like the two of you, it's like a coach, right? You see things that I'm not going to see myself, right? I'm going to take the optimistic side generally of why I'm going to do something, but I miss the nuances of what is this really going to mean? And I think that's where an exercise of coming and speaking to you about what I want to do, you help make sure that I'm on the right track.
That's right. You're emotionally tied. So it is helpful to have that external. And then we all have blockers. We can't see certain things. And that's where the beauty of coaches, in our case, we're wealth managers, coming in and having that expertise the experience is similar. Each client is unique, but some of the circumstances and situations, they overlap. We can bring that to the relationship, which is really powerful.
Yeah, I think it is.
And a lot of fun, I have to say.
I bet. I will tell you, the only thing that I remember of the first time I went out on my own is it related to healthcare, because Cindy, my wife, was not working at that point. So our healthcare, it was not something that I had fully comprehended, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we were spending $1,500 a month, and we had I think either a $10,000 or a $15,000 deductible. So, I mean, we basically had catastrophic insurance. That's all that we had it for, is that if something really went bad, we were going to be covered. But the first $25,000 was going to have to be out of our pocket at a point when didn't have $25,000 to be rolling around that easily.
So important to understand all those different coverages that you have, because people don't understand, and something happens and you get that big doctor's bill and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah, that's crazy.
That can be avoided.
If I wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
For me, I think LinkedIn is always great. Cammie Doder on LinkedIn. I think that's one of the best. You can always email Sandi and me. We receive emails to our podcasts. You would email podcasts@aspiriant.com. Aspiriant is a hard word to spell. So LinkedIn is one of the easiest places.
And also, notes too.
Yep. And the Aspiriant website is a great place to go to, because you can always start a dialogue with us there. And we enjoy that.
Awesome. As always, it's been so fun having you guys on the show, and also leaving some great information in terms of the environment that we're in right now. I think there is so much opportunity here for people to expand where they want to go and the things they really want to do. And I think with your help, it just provides freedom for people to be able to do that. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Patrick. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Patrick.
And pickleball is coming at some point.
We'll see.
Can't wait. We're coming to Florida.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode with Sandi and Cammie. Their company website, Aspiriant, will be in the show notes. And please have a listen to their podcast, Money Tales. You will really enjoy it. As well, I'd like to make you aware that my first book will be available in the next few weeks. There's a pre-launch to it, and that will be in the show notes. The title of the book is The Leadership Bridge: How to Engage Your Employees and Drive Organizational Excellence. This book is really a culmination of years of personal experience and research, observation. And it's something that I believe has the ability to make a difference in terms of how you create bridges with those people that you're asking to follow you. And that's really all it is. We build bridges. And that's what this book is intended to help people do. Build better bridges, not only with those people around you, but also build a better bridge with yourself. I hope you have an opportunity to read that. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader.